Hi, welcome to At the Movies at AMC. I'm Jon Spurney, and the movie we're talking about today is Out of Sight from 1998, directed by Steven Soderbergh. And the genre we've been talking about is the thriller. So Out of Sight is a thriller. We get the plot twists and suspense that are inherent in the genre, but Out of Sight is much more besides. And that is because by the 1990s, when Out of Sight was made, genre conventions had been so thoroughly defined and redefined that filmmakers often started to mix multiple genres together to create new, interesting combinations. And Out of Sight is a great example of this genre mixing. It's lots of different kinds of movies mixed together. So it's a heist movie, right? And we'll be looking at some legitimate heist movies later in this series. But it's a heist movie because the central motor of the plot, aside from the relationship between Foley and Karen Sisco, is the plot to steal the diamonds from Ripley's house. That's really the main plot of the movie, and that's a heist. So it's a heist movie, but it's also a romance because the relationship between Foley and Karen is just as important a motivator of the story as the quest for the diamonds. And in fact, Foley does some things that are detrimental to the quest for the diamonds in his effort to continue his relationship with Karen, who is, after all, the police officer trying to bring him to justice. So Out of Sight is also a gangster picture, right? Because Foley is, after all, ostensibly a bad guy. He's a bank robber who has escaped from prison. But unlike the classic gangster genre, and we'll be looking at this genre later in the series, Foley, the gangster, is the protagonist of the movie, and we want him to succeed, both in his robbery and in his relationship with Karen. In the classic gangster genre, especially in the 1930s, the bad guy pays for his crimes by dying at the end. And we'll see this when we watch Scarface and even Goodfellas later in the series. But in the 1970s, after the shocks of Vietnam and Watergate, the whole sort of paradigm of crime films in the United States shifts, and the criminals often become the protagonists. And so rather than wanting to see them be brought to justice, we want to see them succeed, often because their crimes are victimless or their crimes deal a blow to either the government or the financial system. And we see this is epitomized in Out of Sight by the character of Richard Ripley, played by Albert Brooks. Ripley is ostensibly the victim of the crime of the diamond heist, but we learn very early on in the movie that he himself is a criminal, a Wall Street criminal who has defrauded investors, stolen their money. And so our sympathies stay with Foley. Ripley is only getting what's coming to him. And he doesn't deserve the money that Foley is trying to steal from him. And of course, we know that Foley is a good guy. And he points out numerous times in the movie that he's never fired a gun. And we see very early on in this scene, the first bank robbery scene, that his method of bank robbing is actually incredibly charming. It's not violent. He's just basically being charming with this teller and, instructing her what to do in admittedly a somewhat threatening way, but not a violent way. And his goodness is enforced in the final heist when he returns to the house to save Ripley's lover from being raped, even though he already has the diamonds he came for. And so this really shows us that in his heart, he's a good guy, but this good behavior actually leads to him being captured again by Karen. And of course, his good guy status is immediately communicated to us because he's played by George Clooney, who is the most charming and charismatic movie star of the modern movie era. And the power of movie stardom can communicate a lot to us about a character before they even open their mouths. If Clooney's in the movie, he's a good guy and he's a charming guy, and we know that because we've seen movies with George Clooney before. And finally, Out of Sight is also a prison picture, which is a genre unto itself, movies that take place within the confines of prison. And, the heist is plotted in prison. The inciting incident of the plot is a break from prison and escape. And really one of the main motivators of all of Foley's actions in the movie is his desire to stay out of prison, not to go back to prison. And the prison picture, I don't think we're going to actually look at any examples of this, but the prison picture was a popular genre in the classic Hollywood era. And if you're interested in it, two really good examples are I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang with Paul Muni from 1932 and White Heat with James Cagney from 1949, both really great pictures. So Out of Sight mixes all these genres together so skillfully because its director is Steven Soderbergh. And Soderbergh has a really, really deep knowledge of cinema history and the stylistic tropes of all cinematic genres throughout the world. So Soderbergh is a really interesting director because his first film, the first film he ever made, first feature he ever made, was an indie drama called Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which came out in 1989. And Sex, Lies, and Videotape won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival that year, the biggest award of the festival, and making Soderbergh the youngest director ever to win that prize. He was just 26 years old when he won that. And Sex, Lies, and Videotape and its success, it was a very financially successful movie as well as critically acclaimed. And it really created the indie film revolution of the 1990s here in the United States, where independent directors, and especially the Sundance Film Festival, became the main creative engine of filmmaking in the US, and studios sort of rolled over backwards to snap up young auteurs, young creative directors from the indie world. So the film went on to have a huge commercial success, but interestingly, Soderbergh's next 5 films were not commercially or artistically, arguably successful. He sort of put out flop after flop after this amazing beginning. And so Out of Sight, though not a huge commercial success at the time of its release, was at least a return to form. And it really cemented Soderbergh's relationship with George Clooney, which would flower in the following decades with the incredible success of the Ocean's 11 franchise. And Out of Sight really pushed Soderbergh up into the highest level of director in the United States. And Soderbergh, interestingly, unlike most directors, Soderbergh usually, not early in his career, not in this movie, but now pretty much all the time, Soderbergh acts as the director of photography for his films. And not only is he the DP, but he often operates the camera himself, as you can see in this picture, which is absolutely unheard of in modern Hollywood. In most modern movies, the director does not touch the camera. The director tells the DP what to do. The DP tells the operator what to do. Sometimes the DP is the operator, but to have a director who operates throughout the picture is incredibly rare. And not only is Soderbergh usually the DP, and let me just say that when he is the DP in his movies, he's the cinematographer who's listed in the credits is Peter Andrews, but Peter Andrews is just a pseudonym for Soderbergh. And similarly, Soderbergh usually edits his own movies. which is not unheard of, but rare. And so when he edits his movies, he edits under the pseudonym Mary Ann Bernard. So if you ever see in the credits of the Soderbergh movie, Peter Andrews or Mary Ann Bernard, that is Soderbergh himself. But I should point out that this movie, as I say, this is kind of early in his career. Out of Sight was actually edited by an incredibly successful and famous editor named Ann V. Coates. And she was really one of the most famous editors in Hollywood history. And she actually edited the 1962 David Lean masterpiece, Lawrence of Arabia. So it's pretty incredible that the same person, I don't know if you've seen Lawrence of Arabia, it's a very different picture than Out of Sight, came out in 1962. But it's incredible that the same person edited both of these movies. And I think it's a testament to her incredible talent. So although we're looking at Out of Sight as a thriller, which it is, and all the other things that we have talked about, it's really interesting to me because for me, and I think for most people, really the two most memorable sequences in the movie are actually romantic scenes between Foley and Karen. And so, of course, I'm talking about the trunk scene and the hotel scene. And these tend to be the famous sequences in the movie that when people talk about the movie, they remember the most and they talk about the most. And in my opinion, these are really two of the greatest love scenes of the modern Hollywood era. And they really helped establish the stardom of George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez, who, when this movie was made, were both still very early in their careers and weren't really bona fide movie stars. And it was, their performance in this movie that really kind of pushed them, as well as Soderbergh, into a much higher echelon of power and popularity in Hollywood. And that, the chemistry here with the two of them in both these scenes, individually and collectively, is just undeniable and is really a testament to the stars that they became. So the trunk scene is really a classic Hollywood trope that we had seen in many movies before. A couple who don't like each other are forced to be together by some outside force, and by being confined together, realize that they're actually in love with each other. And one of the earliest and best examples of this is in a film we discussed briefly last time. That is Alfred Hitchcock's The 39 Steps, which was the last picture Hitchcock made before coming to America. And in this film, as you can see, a man falsely accused of a crime, the classic wrong man plot that we talked about when we looked at North by Northwest, is handcuffed to a woman who thinks he's actually a criminal. And so she's forced to accompany him as he attempts to prove his innocence, which is, of course, the double chase plot we talked about when we talked about North by Northwest. And through the course of their journey, handcuffed together, they fall in love. And of course, he spoiler alert, he proves his innocence. So this trope is replicated in the scene in Out of Sight when Foley and Karen are locked in the trunk together during the jailbreak at the beginning of the picture. And in one sense, this is just a convoluted example of what in romantic comedies they call the meet cute, which is having the couple first meet in an unexpected and novel way. But I think this scene goes really beyond a simple meet cute and establishes the attraction between them that will really drive the plot for the rest of the picture. And you really feel the chemistry between them. And interestingly, this was the scene that Jennifer Lopez had to read for her audition to get the part in the movie. And the audition actually took place at Clooney's house. She laid on Clooney's couch with him and did the entire scene. And that's what got her the part. And the reason she did the entire scene was that Soderbergh originally wanted the sequence to be one single shot to emphasize the time that they're spending together in the trunk. And it was originally shot that way as one take, what in the industry they call a oneer. And they shot the sequence as one shot 45 times before Soderbergh was happy with the take. But then test audiences did not like the single shot, thinking it was too long. So Soderbergh reshot the sequence after the film was originally completed, using different angles, cutting back and forth from inside the trunk to the car on the road, the sequence we're looking at now. But I think part of what makes the sequence so successful is the way Soderbergh bathed them in red light. And, you know, ostensibly the source of the light is the tail lights of the car shining into the trunk. But of course, those wouldn't be possibly as bright as they are in the actual sequence. But it's so beautiful. And the red light really kind of, to me, reinforces the erotic charge between them, as well as being just aesthetically beautiful. And I think this scene is kind of architecturally the most important scene in the movie, certainly in the screenplay of the movie, because it establishes the attraction between Foley and Karen that really drives all of their behavior for the rest of the picture. You know, it's the spark that's lit between them in the trunk that kind of causes everything that happens afterwards to happen. The hotel scene, on the other hand, is the two characters finally coming together after they both realized the truth of the attraction that they felt in the trunk was real. And this scene is really beautifully written. You know, it starts with Karen. We're going to cut to it here. It starts with Karen's oh, and watch this freeze frame, and that the freeze frame and the dissolve are just beautiful. But the scene starts with Karen's rebuff of these buffoonish ad executives who are hitting on her. And, you know, she sends these guys packing, but it's immediately contrasted with her instant interest in Foley once he appears as this kind of ghostly image reflected in the window with his totemic Zippo lighter that he has throughout the picture. It's just so beautiful. It's so beautifully shot. Those freeze frames and dissolves we talked about, which he does throughout the movie. And I think he uses those freeze frames and dissolves to kind of dilate moments, you know, stretch time out and create a feeling of timelessness between the two of them. But incredibly, when you look at this, this sequence was actually shot on a set. This is a set, and the cityscape behind them with the falling snow is fake. The snow is fake. The cityscape is fake. This is on a soundstage. Which is just incredible. And the falling snow becomes a real sort of visual trope throughout the sequence. It's basically in the background of every shot, whether it's in focus or not. And like there, I mean, it's just so beautiful. And interestingly, this entire sequence gets echoed later in the film, which we're going to see in 1 second, when Karen confronts Foley during the heist at Ripley's house. So when that heist is happening, you can see the snow. So when this heist is happening, you can see the same snow following through a window in the background behind Foley right there. You know, it's a total callback to that moment. And incredibly and obviously, the exact same music cue that plays during the hotel scene is playing during this sequence, which unfortunately ends with her shooting him. But you know, it's obviously meant to reprise the sort of bond between them that we saw in the hotel scene. And here she goes. She only shoots him in the legs, though, so I guess it's okay. And as long as we're talking about the way the film is shot, we should talk about the color palette. And there's something really skillful Soderbergh does. He uses very broad changes in his color palette to delineate between the two main sections of the movie, the Miami section and the Detroit section. So the first half of the story takes place in Florida and specifically in Miami. So it's shot with a very tropical palette of bright pastels, yellow and orange and turquoise and pink. Most of the Miami sequences were shot in South Beach, which is known for this color scheme. as well as for its Art Deco architecture. And you can see all these bright tropical pastels just on the walls of all these shots. But the minute the movie moves to Detroit, the color palette becomes completely different. Everything turns blue. And this sort of highlights the coldness of Detroit and its contrast to the warmth of Miami. And obviously Detroit doesn't look like this. It's not a blue city. This was done on purpose. All of these shots were made blue so that they would feel cold. And, today films are color corrected like this digitally, which gives filmmakers complete control over the color palette and post-production. But Out of Sight was made just before the digital era began. So this movie was shot on film, and all these color corrections, all this addition of blue to these scenes had to be done through the old-fashioned process they called color timing, where when they developed film, different colors were exposed for different amounts of time while the film was being developed to create a preponderance of one color in a specific look in any scene. And Soderbergh here just goes for blue in Detroit, and it really works. And one of the reasons that these color changes help so much in the movie is because they let us know where we are in time, because Out of Sight takes place on a non-linear timeline. We are constantly moving back and forth in time until we get to the final heist in Detroit, when the story becomes a straight forward linear narrative. So just for example, the first time we see Foley at the very beginning of the picture, that is actually halfway through the story in actual time. The first shot of him during the opening credits, the first shot of him in the opening credits, ripping off his tie in frustration, actually takes place after his time in prison, when he learns about Ripley's diamonds. But we don't know this until literally an hour and 15 minutes later in the movie, in this scene, when we see him rip off his tie in frustration after his meeting with Ripley, where he's only been offered the job of security guard. So when we see him tearing off his tie here, we realize we have come full circle, and now we know where we are in time. And of course, it's his frustration from meeting with Ripley that leads to his unsuccessful robbing of the bank in the first place, which sends him to the prison where he meets Karen. And so it's a really circular story until they go to Detroit. And so nonlinear timelines became very popular in Hollywood after the success of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction in 1994. And if you haven't seen that film, I highly recommend it. It's one of the great movies in the 90s, and it features a non-consecutive narrative. There are a lot of stories that come together at the end of the movie, but you see them at different times, and they don't intersect until pretty much the end of the movie. And I should say at this point that Out of Sight has a really interesting connection with Tarantino himself, because just before Out of Sight was made, Tarantino released the film Jackie Brown, starring Pam Grier, which is another great, my favorite Tarantino movie, and highly recommended. And both Out of Sight and Jackie Brown were based on novels written by the same author, Elmore Leonard. Leonard was a very successful writer of crime fiction. Almost 30 books he wrote were made into movies. And interestingly, he set most of his stories in Detroit or South Florida, like this movie. But because both books were written by the same author, there's a character that appears in both of the novels that Out of Sight and Jackie Brown was based on. And this is the character of Ray Nicolette, the FBI agent that Karen is involved with at the beginning of Out of Sight. And in Jackie Brown, the part of Ray Nicolette was played by Michael Keaton. So Soderbergh asked Tarantino if he could have Keaton play the part of Ray Nicolette in Out of Sight as well, which he did. So Keaton did it completely for free, even though Jackie Brown was made by a different studio. And as far as I know, this is the first time, and maybe the only time in Hollywood history, you have one actor playing the same character in two movies made by different directors for different studios. So that's just a weird trivia fact about Out of Sight. So I just want to go now to further viewing. These are movies you should check out if you enjoyed Out of Sight. Get Shorty is another film based on an Elmore Leonard novel. Super fun crime story, very similar to this movie, and directed by Barry Sonnenfeld, and features Douglas Farina, who plays Jennifer Lopez's father in Out of Sight. And both this movie, both Out of Sight and Get Shorty, were produced by Danny DeVito. Midnight Run is one of my favorite movies of the 80s with Charles Grodin and Robert De Niro. It's just a really great, it's a crime movie, but it's much more, and just super enjoyable, and the kind of movie that Hollywood just does not make anymore. And I highly, highly recommend it. Hell or High Water is a really great modern crime movie about a bunch of brothers conducting a series of holdups of banks. But there's a specific reason they're doing it, and I won't tell you that reason because that's what makes the movie very interesting. And finally, Logan Lucky from 2017 is another heist movie directed by Steven Soderbergh. And it's a really great heist movie that revolves around robbing a NASCAR track in the southern United States. And it stars Adam Driver, who gives a really great performance. And it's just a super fun, it's similar to this movie. It's a crime movie, but it's also just fun and romantic. And Soderbergh is really good, as we've seen in Out of Sight, at mixing genres together and just creating a confection that's just completely enjoyable. So please check out those pictures if you liked Out of Sight. So for our next film, because of the Thanksgiving holiday in the United States, I think, as far as I know, our next film won't be till December 10th. And on December 10th, we'll be looking at the genre of the Western, the sort of classic American genre. And our first example is John Ford's classic Stagecoach, from what many consider to be the greatest year in American movie history, which is 1939. John Ford was the undisputed master of the Western genre, and Stagecoach is really the classic paradigmatic Western, shot like so many of Ford's great films in the beautiful Monument Valley area of Arizona. And so it was really the breakout film for John Wayne. And after appearing in Stagecoach, he